Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar on patient registries organized by EURORDIS with the help of 3 panelists. I'm going to introduce what we plan on doing today very quickly, as well as the people on our call. And that way give you both information on housekeeping details, but the objectives of what we hope to get out of this call. So I'll start with the housekeeping. This session will be recorded and we will, Luca, nice to see you. We will be sharing the recording of the webinar to certainly all those who have joined, but maybe more importantly to those who couldn't join. So those will be circulated to you all to share with colleagues. We have an unprecedented number of people who have asked to register for this call. We're already at 100, which is our maximum for our Zoom capacity. So we're also streaming this on Facebook Live, which will mimic the same format of presentation and opportunity for answers. The participants on the call, you will have noticed that you aren't able to speak, unfortunately, with that many people. It's just not possible. And so what we suggest rather is that you chat in your questions on the question and answer space on Zoom or the equivalent on Facebook Live. My colleagues online will be helping identify questions, and of course we'll just limit it to 1 or 2 on this call. But what we would like to do at the very end of this webinar is to consolidate all questions that were asked, group them in terms of type of questioning, and with the help of our panelists come up with answers that we can then circulate as a nice educational document, both for those who are presenting as well, and more importantly for those who are online. So the agenda we have set to 10 to 15 minutes per presentation. So I just ask all my speakers to try to respect that as closely as possible. I've asked our panelists to also open questions to the audience in terms of your needs as patient advocates and stakeholders in the rare disease community working on registries, what you find most important that they may be able to help with as providers. And if you have, of course, any technical problems, I have 2 colleagues on the line that can help us with that. So please shout out if you can't hear or see anything, or if you have to leave, or yeah, what have you. So without further ado, I guess I can introduce our panelists and my colleagues on the line. We have Julian Isla, who is a EURORDIS volunteer and founder of Foundation 29, George Reynolds from Rare ERN, Lucas and Georgie, who's the chair of the ERN Research Working Group, as well as the coordinator of ERN BON, the Rare Bone Diseases Reference Network. I have my colleague Virginie Brasfacer, Director of Research, Gulcin Gumus, the Research and Policy Project Manager, and myself, Anna Cole, Public Health Policy Advisor at EURORDIS. And in terms of Virginie, Gulcin, and I, we're certainly the members on our team who are active, or who have been, in my case, active in projects around data collection, data sharing, and registration of patient data from a patient point of view. I just want to disclose that this is a new initiative on our behalf. So this is certainly not a topic that EURORDIS has not contributed to before. We've been very active in the space of rare disease registries from a patient perspective in over a decade, if not longer. But the idea of having a webinar with certain public and private providers in the space is certainly new. So I just want to be clear that we're not endorsing any of the projects or platforms that are being presented. They've been selected in a random order, and I guess what's exciting is that it's an opportunity for us to be able to create a series of webinars for which we can invite other experts and providers in the field. And the real goal is to give an opportunity to our members and the larger patient advocacy community to just get an update of a sample of what's out there, and then of course make their own educated decisions around what they would like to use as tools that can best drive forward research and drug development and advocacy in their respective disease areas. I guess on behalf of patients, certainly in EURORDIS's point of view, and it's been certainly enforced by the number of people on this call. We have over 200 people registered for this webinar. So I think our sense that there's still an enormous need, not only of the existence of patient registries, but on education around how to best do them. And perhaps we're at a unique moment in time where there's a lot of new opportunities to make that happen. New legislation, new technological advances that can make that more efficient, but perhaps a great need to update people on what's out there to do it most efficiently. Certainly from a patient point of view, there's no shortage of recognition more than any other stakeholder, I would say, from my point of view, is driven to make sure that data is well collected, that it's collected efficiently, as in it's ideally collected once and collected well, but of course that's not always possible. And that above all, it's used. So not just collected for collection's sake, but actually applied. The obstacles, I think we all know, of course, range from financial, technical, legal, and human. But if I would just underscore from the patient point of view, there's often a frustration that the data sharing culture still has much room for improvement. And so it's for this reason that we are very active in the space as EURORDIS, and certainly advocate to make sure that all the tools, policies are in place to foster that sharing. So it's also for this reason that I've asked our panelists to focus their presentations with that point of view, which is how can you best integrate patients as partners in your process, as actors in your process, whether it's to start a new registry or to improve one that's existing. I think it's important to keep that patient-centric point of view in mind. So with that, I would, in this case, since we have Luca on the line, ask him to begin with his presentation. Luca?
Yes, sorry. I will be able to join you just for my presentation because I have a commitment with a patient organization today and we are preparing a quality of life study. So as I have agreed with Anna, I will just give a presentation and then, sorry, I will sneak out and but I'll be very happy to receive all the minutes of this meeting and eventually also the recording. I would be, if Anna could be so kind to show my first presentation. Okay. Yep, correct. That's it. As you might know, these are slides that are coming from the research working group. I'm still the chair of the research working group for a couple of days because starting from the end of June, this will become a mandate of Alberto Pereira, that is the coordinator of Endo ERN. But we as research working group have organized internally a sort of division according to whom now the person that is going to be in charge of taking care of the registry call is going to be Eduardo Lopez Granato from Transplant Child, that I must acknowledge from the fact that he was just giving me the slides. So the slide that I will briefly show you, and you can go directly to the second slide, Anna, is to set up, as you might know, ERNI. And another slide, please, Anna, the following slide. Rita, but to be honest, most of ERN are already setting up their own registry group. But this registry have a quite different way of interpreting the situation, meaning that some ERN are collecting data from scientific society, other ERN, like the eye that I was just showing before, are more collecting data from previous registries that are part of the different healthcare provider of the ERN. And can you go to the next slide, please? This is the call that is now out, and as most of you should know, the call was out since May 14, and it will close on September 10. And the call is reserved for the 19 ERN that have not been financed in the first call. Please note that there is a clear memorandum of understanding with JERC that is clearly stating that all the registry must follow the indication of JERC. Next slide, Anna. You can find all the slide in the, all the, let's say, requirement from JERC at this link. Next slide. These are the JRC set of common data element for the RD registries. So all the registry and all the that will participate to the second call must take into consideration this common data element. Next slide. These are the 5 registries that have already financed. Next again. What is European Commission clearly asking? Not to reinvent the wheel. What is clearly required is to set up something that will go together and taking into consideration what has already been developed, and possibly to join or use what has been already set up. Next slide. Actually, next presentation. And these are the slides that, as I was mentioning, Eduardo has prepared for the meeting that we had yesterday of the ERN coordinator. Eduardo, I mean the registry working group and mainly Eduardo has set up this kind of questionnaire that could be used to prepare the call and to collect all the needs of the ERN in order to favor this interaction that I was previously mentioning. Next slide. These are the timeline of the activity that has been followed. And as you can see, since the January, the 24th of January workshop, that was the first workshop of the face-to-face workshop of the ERN Research Working Group. This was the starting for defining that task force on registry was needed. Since then, a lot of activities are ongoing, and as you can see, on July 18, there will be another face-to-face with all the people that one representative for each ERN that has been designed to prepare the call and to follow the call. Next slide. As you can see, there is a clear interaction also with the European Joint Project on Rare Disease, and more specifically on Pillar 2 of the AGP. Following slide. And these are the results of the short survey that has been just mentioned. Next. These are the ERN that have already responded. There is already a contact person for all of these registries that have responded, and there are already 23 ERN representatives that will be willing to participate in the task force. Next. The first point that was considered is that in most of the cases, it's clear that this registry will kind of be more epidemiological registries, meaning that they are aiming to cover the vast majority or the whole range of conditions that are part of the ERN. And please consider that, just to give you an example, Bond ERN has something like more than 400 diseases. So it will be quite difficult to define a specific, I would say, part of the registry for each disease in this call. Next. It's quite obvious anyhow that there are consistent overlap regarding some disease with different ERNs, so it's needed to have a strong interaction between the ERN. And this is the case for close to less than 60% of the cases. Still, there is a 30% of the cases in which the disease that they will cover are so specific that an interaction with other ERN is not needed. Next. But what is clearly is going to be clearly the option is that most of the ERN will use the previous tool that has been developed by the other registry, but they will go for specification that are typical of each ERN, and that makes a lot of sense. Next slide. And this is a question that was really relevant, meaning that most of the people knew about ERDRI, that is the platform developed by the JRC, but in the discussion that we had in Brussels, what is clear is that a more specific approach to this platform is going to be needed. And a specific training on this platform is going to be relevant, and moreover, sort of a continuous contact with JRC during the preparation of this of the proposal for the call is going to be mandatory. Next. Obviously, all the people were interested in participating to the task force. And another, next slide. These are the most burning questions. For the 5 ERNs that have the registry in place, clearly one of the most relevant aspects is how to deal with all these aspects that you can see here. While for the other 19, one of the aspects that is most relevant is how to collect the vast majority of the information that is needed. If you can have a clear look to this, there are 2 aspects that are similar. That is verification, so how to make the data fair, and how to connect / interact with other registries. Next slide. These are relevant aspects that have been mentioned as well. And next, I think that was the last slide. Yes. I will try after this very fast presentation, meaning that Anna asked me to give all this information in 10 minutes, and I try to do my best. How patient can be part of this business? That's a relevant question. The first part is that all the patients that are EPACs should directly contact their ERN coordinator, and in case they have not already done that, ask for the information that the European Commission is giving constantly. I mean, most of the information that I just gave you are already present in, I would say, every week. Hélène Leborn is sending out an email collecting most of this information that are available to all the ERN coordinator and all the members of the research working group. So the first we as Body ERN are circulating this to all the healthcare provider and also the EPEG. But in case this is not the strategy that your ERN has chosen, knock at the door of your ERN coordinator and ask for this information. Second, most of the ask to be part of the group that are preparing this presentation. Bondi ERN has a coordinating group that is coordinated by the Registry working group. Anyhow, they have already defined work packages, and in most of the work packages, patients are involved from the beginning in the preparation of the proposal. Because I think that one of the relevant aspects is that the patient should be present since the starting of the preparation of the proposal. Sorry again, I have to leave, and if there are burning questions, I will be happy to answer to them. Otherwise, you can send the request to Anna, and Anna will forward the request to me. As suggestion, if you want to continue with this connection, I would suggest for the next, if you want to keep on going on this topic, I would suggest for the next TC also to include Eduardo Lopez Granado in the list of invited people, and to switch the invitation from me to Alberto Pereira, that is the new research coordinator. Anyhow, I'll be happy to keep on contributing for the aspects that are in charge to me among the four. Okay, I can give you also this information. We have decided to have, let's say, every specific competencies on the four of us. I will be in charge of being the liaison officer for EMA, and I will also be in charge of the connection with research infrastructure. As you might know, one of the results of the recent questionnaire that was sent by European Joint Project on Rare Disease is that many healthcare providers do not know or do know very little about research infrastructure, and this is something that we would like to change and switch. And I can tell you that on starting from, I think that is going to be November 13, there will be a meeting in Brussels between the ERN Research Working Group and the research infrastructure. Last but not least, in my last days, I will keep on asking to launch the call for the inclusion of EPAGs representative in the ERN Research Working Group. So that this is one of the, my heredity, I would say, that is going to be important and relevant. So you will have a direct information and direct participation also to the planning of the activity of the research working group. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Luca. Thank you for joining us on a day when I know you have other obligations. I just have a few comments. You're welcome to leave, or I'm just going to maybe clarify a few things from your presentation for those in the audience who are maybe less aware of some of the platforms and acronyms that you use. So just for everyone's information, the JRC is the science and knowledge generating arm of the Commission, which has been tasked in the last few years to very simply try to create a platform in which to decrease the fragmentation of registration of rare disease patients across Europe. And that's been done in a number of ways. One, the platform which Luca referred to, but also a number of training opportunities for those who are starting registries. So there's certainly information on the links that were in Luca's presentation and on their website. I just wanted to draw your attention also to other training opportunities in this field. So as Luca, you mentioned, the interface between research infrastructures is a very important one. And the newest European joint program on rare diseases certainly has a training piece in general and very specifically on rare diseases, and we'll be sure to circulate a link to that program for all of the audience to be able to identify where they can get more training on registries there. And then finally, yeah, just to clarify again, the verification of data. So for those who are not up to speed with the newest jargon and data sharing, it's an acronym FAIR, just to recognize that data, certainly from a patient, but any stakeholder point of view, should be feasible, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So the idea there being that we are not only just collecting patient data for collection's sake, but that it's actually being used. So with that, I will thank you again, Luca, for joining us and for being very concise on such a vast new call for registries in the context of European reference networks. Yeah, we will respect your wishes to transfer your responsibilities to the upcoming panelists. So thank you for making that smooth, and certainly for your final message, which is to continually advocate for the involvement of EPAGs in that process. So thank you for that perspective from the Public Infrastructure Commission point of view. So now we'll have Julian Isla from Foundation 29 present his activities.
Thank you, Anna. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Just to make sure.
Yep.
Thank you for the introduction. I'm working in Microsoft and in Microsoft Consulting Services. My expertise in Microsoft right now is in artificial intelligence. I'm also chairman and founder of Foundation 29, which is a non-profit organization focusing on how technology can be used to solve problems of people with rare diseases. I'm also the scientific officer of the Dravet European Federation. This is a European organization for organizations of patients with Dravet syndrome, and we have countries, we have organizations in 16 countries in Europe. I'm also a member of the TAC, the Therapeutic Advisory Group of EURORDIS, an EURORDIS volunteer, member of the Orphan Drug Committee of the European Medicine Agency, and in Spain, member of the Scientific Advisory Board of CIBERER, which is the Spanish Network for Research on Rare Diseases. The reason of all these activities is because of Sergio. Sergio is one of my sons, and he has Dravet syndrome. Dravet syndrome is a neurological condition. It's a severe condition with, unfortunately, not very good prognosis. 1 year ago, we started Foundation 29, like an initiative from patients in order to be able to explore how technology can be used to solve problems. The main goal that we are doing right now, the main activity, what we are doing right now is data collection, and how data collection can be used to create decision support tools and tools that patients, physicians, researchers can use to make better decisions. The main problem with orphan drugs, I've been working with or collaborating with the European Medicine Agency for 4 years, and I participate in a lot of reviews of medical products for rare diseases. And the main problem that we have is this one. When my son was diagnosed with Dravet syndrome, it was almost 10 or 11 years ago. And the medication he was taking at that time was valproate, clobazam, stiripentol. 10 years or 11 years after, he's taking the same medication. So The problem in rare diseases is new therapies, new drugs. The development of new therapies is very, very low. We right now have a couple of clinical trials for new drugs, but they drugs are symptomatic. They are not drugs designed to cure Dravet syndrome. They are these drugs just for the symptoms. The main message is development of new drugs is very, very low compared with other industries. Here you have numbers from the European Medicine Agency. In the left chart, you have the number of orphan drug designations in the past years. As you can see, it's trending up. Every year, we are giving more orphan drug designation to new medical products, which is good. But at the same time, the products going to the market, the products having marketing authorization is more or less flat. That means that right now, having access to a drug is rare. If you have a rare disease, it's difficult. And also, if a drug is approved, having approval from the national authorities, having a price is difficult as well, because usually these kind of products, they have very, very high price. There is also a problem with access to drug, or how you can be benefit of having a drug. Because if we have 7,000 rare diseases, the number of drugs that we have, 150 or 60, is just for this small population, the black boxes. The white boxes, they don't have a drug from the condition they have. But it's even worse, because for the 160 indications, a lot of products are for the same condition. So the number of people in the rare disease community with a drug for the condition they have is very reduced. And it's even worse if you are analyzing the drugs that they are able to change the disease dramatically and cure a disease. The number of people with this product is very, very low. So how we can speed up this process, how we can make sure we are able to increase or produce more drugs for people. This is the total cost right now worldwide for rare diseases, for orphan medical products. But remember, this is just for this small population. If we want to multiply this number and to be able to cover all the rare disease community, this will be the total amount of money needed. The number is so high that it's very difficult to know how big it is. But if I can tell you, this is similar to the total revenue of those three big countries, Germany, UK, and France together. You can imagine this is a very, very big number. I mean, with the same cost that we have right now, if we want to produce drugs for all the rare diseases, we will have to use the money that the economy of Germany, UK, and France is together, which is very difficult. And also we are facing a problem on how science is moving right now. In the past, science has been based on observation. You know, scientists, they made observations, they made simulations, you know, using equations and mathematical models to explain the reality. But right now, the science is being done in a different way. Maybe you are familiar with this picture. This is a black hole, the first picture of a black hole. And this picture has been done by thousands of computers, taking millions of data. And this is because science is moving into a new direction where knowledge is coming from data. It's not coming from the rational thinking of scientists. It's coming from how the data is able to produce new knowledge. And look at these companies. Airbnb and Uber are very, very popular or very successful companies in terms of revenue. Airbnb is for hospitality, but they don't have any hotel. And Uber is for mobility, and they don't have any car. The only information or the only asset they have is data. And this is very valuable. And in science and medicine, in order to produce, better drugs, better system, better decision tools, high quality data is needed. It's very important. So from Foundation 29, what we are trying to do is, work on this area and try to create a platform that the patients can use to collect the data with high quality. The more important the more important thing you have to know about Health 29, which is how we call our platform, is in this platform, the patient owns the data. In most of the registries, the central place where the data will be can be an hospital, can be a research institution. In our platform, the main database is with the patient. We started to work with Duchenne parent project in Europe to be able to develop this platform. And right now the platform is being tested by the Duchenne community. The idea of the platform is that this will be more than a clinical database. We are incorporating a social Q&A, which is very important. I will explain you what that means. PROMs, patient-reported outcomes, full genotype, full phenotype. The genotype and phenotype is needed because these kind of data sets are needed for precision medicine. If you check the NIH definition of precision medicine, phenotype and phenotype has a prevalent role in the definition of precision medicine. Social Q&A. Right now, where the information for rare diseases is going? Right now, it's going to Facebook. Every patient organization has a Facebook group where the people is meeting, the people is putting questions, the people is putting answers, but this knowledge is not managed by the patient organization. It's managed by Facebook right now. And something we want to do, and I will roll a video, this is a real video of the platform. The platform has a chatbot, a conversational interface where the patients can type particular questions for the disease. For example, for the Duchenne community, knowing about the wheelchair is very important. And if you ask this question, the system is giving to you an answer who has been curated by the patient organization, and the quality is very good. If you are asking for a particular recommendation for drugs, well, a particular recommendation for drug has to be to a doctor, right? And everything has to be checked with a doctor. But if you are looking for information for steroids, the platform will be able to provide an answer that has been curated and managed by the patient organization. If you are asking a question and the system is not aware of the answer, the question will go to the patient organization to be added to the database. This is the main functionality we are adding into the platform, because the platform is taking care of these social needs from patients. Another important data set that we are capturing right now are PROMs, patient-reported outcomes. And for Duchenne, we have a full set of clinical data, very well specialized for Duchenne, but this can be customized for patient organizations to accommodate to particular needs. And is standardized using a standard behind, and we are implementing quality controls to make sure the quality of the data is good enough. For example, particular data has to be checked from the physician. The physician has to certify that the data is correct. This information has to be easy to fill by users, and we provide an API for interoperability. This is a more technical concept, but in other words, if you have another application, another registry willing to communicate to this platform, the platform has the capability, the interfaces to be able to do it. For phenotyping, we are leveraging very good technology for deep phenotyping using clinical natural language processing. And if you upload a document with your medical records, the system automatically is reading the medical records and extracting the symptoms. This is a technology that we are creating with an hospital in Canada, in Toronto, the Sick Kids Hospital. We are very proud of this technology because the level of identification of symptoms that we are having is very, very high. And also the platform is able to store genotypic information in terms of NGS, next generation sequencing file. So if you have genomic information or information from an exon or a panel or single point mutations or changes in DNA, this information is stored in the database using HGVS standard, the recommendation from ERDIC. In the future, the platform will be able to do something very interesting, for example, like clustering patients. Clustering means finding patients with similar genotype because the data are similar. And this is something that machine learning and artificial intelligence can do very easily. This is what we are building. At the end, in Foundation 29, Health 29 is like the platform that we create, where patients that patients can use to store the data, and we are providing something called data lockers for patients. I mean, the patient will have a data locker, a safety place where the patient will be able to put the data. The data locker will have the FAIR principles: findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. And the data locker will provide interoperability with other platforms, ownership, and portability. The problem that we are facing, I'm facing this problem. My son is in Madrid Regional Health Service. If I move to other city in Madrid, I don't have any way to move the data of my son with me. And the hospital won't be able to send the data to the other hospital. This is just in Spain. I can imagine what will happen if I have to move to a different country, different language. It's going to be almost impossible. And we are implementing the concept of visiting the data. This is something we learned from the people working on FAIR, that in the near future, the data has to be visited to get insights. It's not about sharing your data, all the data. It's about letting people know to visit your data to answer questions. And another thing very important that we really take care of is privacy and security. All the platforms has been designed following GDPR principles. Right now, we are finishing the privacy impact assessment, and we have a DPO nominated, and we realize that, you know, GDPR is very important. It's very, very important for this kind of platforms. If you guys are planning to work on a registry, it's very, very important that the provider providing the service has full knowledge about GDPR and what GDPR means, because a mistake in the design of the database, not following GDPR principles, can compromise the future of the platform. And as the finish of my presentation, I have a question to the audience, and the question is, do you think you need a strategy for your data? Because, you know, when you are running a patient organization, usually you don't care about data as a part of the strategy. But my question is, in the future, maybe you have to take care about. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian, for your presentation and for putting it in the context, obviously, of your personal story and the specific disease that you and your family live with. I think that will be certainly very valuable to the members of our audience who perhaps are living with some of the rare diseases. And yeah, for the moment, we have maybe adequate platforms of data collection for a select number of disease areas that are more prevalent. But I imagine that one question, certainly for the rare of diseases and for those where nothing exists already, is where do I begin? So I think it's very helpful to have your example as one of the options. We have a specific question from our audience, actually, in terms of Health 29. Everyone seems to be a great fan. The question is, how can they use it? So if there are existing platforms of data collection out there already, how can this be perhaps integrated into what they're already using?
they can contact us. Right now, we are working with Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy patient organization, like our partners in developing the platform. They are funding the initial states of the platform. We are going to start to collaborate with San Filippo Federation in Europe as well. And we want to focus on quality right now. We want to make sure the platform is solid in terms of GDPR management, in terms of security, in terms of standards, and in terms of interoperability. If we are sure that the platform can be leveraged to other conditions, we will allow patient organizations to be able to set up the registry on that platform, right? But we need to think in the sustainability model for the cost of the platform, because at the end we're a non-profit organization. We are not making money for this. In fact, we are right now losing money. But this is very important that if the patient organization trusts us, they will be able to know about the roadmap of the platform, how the data will be maintained, and how the sustainability of the platform would be in the future. We don't have any funding for European commissions or research programs or anything, right? Because we are looking for flexibility and speed. We want to make sure the platform is ready as soon as possible, right? But in the other hand, we are looking for how the platform can be sustainable in the future. That's very important. So right now, the call for the patient organizations is, if you are interested on this solution, contact us, okay? And we will let you know how we are moving forward and what you can do in the next months, okay?
Yes, thank you, Julian. And it sounds maybe like you can be helpful even in a preliminary step. So as you mentioned, what's your strategy on collecting data? Yeah, perhaps there's already existing wealth, and it's helping patient organizations help their members to best organize their data before they even consider where to enter it. In terms of funding, I guess that's maybe a good segue into our next presentation. So you mentioned, Julian, overall the overwhelming costs of orphan drugs on our society, and I guess there's probably some debate, or definitely some debate around what that number actually is, depending on sources of information and really maybe lack of detail in terms of what those sources of data are. But I think you bring up a good point in the sense that unless we have real world data around the effectiveness of the drugs that do exist, and certainly industry being required more and more to collect that once the few treatments that we do have available are on the market, that can only help in an indirect way lower costs, so to speak. But even more importantly, I think the message from your presentation is that industry might not be the only audience that's capable of collecting this data, and that with the help of artificial intelligence, patient organizations can certainly supplement what's being collected.
Another important topic that I didn't cover is the economics behind, because right now we have researchers doing research in so many countries in Europe, most of them funded by national authorities. And when they are creating knowledge that can be transformed into a drug, the knowledge has to be transferred into the industry. The industry developed the drug, and the drug is coming to the market, to the same citizen, and we have to pay a lot of money for that. I mean, we are paying twice. We are paying at the beginning as citizens when the concept is being developed, and we are paying at the end when the product is ready. And it's very clear that the model that we are following won't be able to scale for all the conditions. So at the same time that we are working in this kind of solutions, we need to start to explore different ways of, creating knowledge and how we are tracking the value that we are creating on this knowledge to make sure at the end, some kind of this value can go back to the patient. You know, that's very
Agreed.
important. I don't know how to do it right now, to be honest.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry we don't have any health economists on the line. That certainly would have more well-rounded the debate. So I won't pretend that that's something that I can shed light on. Although certainly I think it would be a good aspect to have on future webinars and discussions. And then just to say, of course, the topic of regulations around bringing drugs to market is happening at this very moment. And of course, everything that you mentioned is central to that debate. So again, I don't want to speak on behalf of the missing stakeholders in that discussion, but just to be conscious of the fact that yes, models are being questioned, and how data is collected and how can it better improve the implementation of those legislations is something that we're very active in, and I hope that the audience will comment on to represent that point of view. So with that, I will pass the microphone to George, who will present on a suggestion as to how research and industry may be able to collaborate around data collection.
Yes, thank you, Anna.
Please go ahead.
Okay, so let me just try and share my screen, see if that works for us. Okay. First, I thank you, Anna, and everybody at EURORDIS for this opportunity. What I will be focusing on is perhaps a more of a cold-face approach to my experience in handling multiple different registries and how things are working out in practical terms. What we're going to try to cover is, yes, of course, I'll be looking at how pharma and patient organizations can work together. Now, that's, as Julian would point out, if you're one of the lucky rare diseases that have a pharma that's developing a treatment. But assuming you are, then that's a partnership that we need to try and work on. But also what we need to look at is what is a strategy to develop what I call a European-wide roadmap for registries. So that's not relevant to whether there's a pharma involved or not. So what we need to look at here is there's two big issues. There's the registry planning and registry software. So let me just see if I can. Just a moment, sorry. That's right.
Is it not transitioning the slides, George?
Yeah, so a bit of my own background. I've been working exclusively in rare disease for the last 6 years. I've worked in a lot of big registries: cystic fibrosis, epidermolysis bullosa, hemophilia. Cystic fibrosis is, I think most people recognize, is kind of seen as the poster child for rare diseases. So there's a lot of very useful things I've learned in that area. Also worked closely with a lot of big pharma, Vertex, Biogen, and Shire. So I think I can see the perspective from both sides, from patient organizations, or from three sides: patient organizations, researchers, and also the pharma, the industry. So we need to be sensitive to all of their needs. I've worked for companies the last few years, Vitro Software and OpenApp, and both of those were jointly won the CPMS tender to provide the 24 European Reference Network software. So I was responsible for managing that submission. So I have a fair amount of understanding then of how the ERNs should be working in theory anyway. The other thing at the moment, we're working on several other areas: vasculitis, pulmonary fibrosis, Gaucher's, and brittle bone disease. So I'm able to I've been lucky in that I'm able to see data collection across a wide variety of different diseases and how that can be implemented. So some of the problems here. Before doing that, we need to address some definitions. What we're looking at is different types of registries. What we look at is the most common registry that people have out there is a level 1 registry. It's a population or epidemiological registry. They are fairly easy to set up, and they are very useful for giving population-based information. The second level after that is where you add an annual summary. And one of the key messages of this presentation is getting longitudinal data. And that's really what we need to be able to show. We need to be able to show what is the trend over time for patients. So a lot of registries, for example, cystic fibrosis, they're able to take an annual summary, and they can then show the progression of key quantifiable elements over time. Let's say it's an FEV for lung function. So this is extremely useful. So we need to try and see, can we move our registry up to those? And then level 3 is where you encounter data. At that stage, you're really bumping into a basically much more like a clinical trial product where you're collecting a lot more data, but obviously that then involves a lot more cost. Let's just look at what some of the problems we're trying to address here. This is very much from the pharmaceutical perspective, but it helps to understand some of their issues. So they're very concerned about not funding patient organizations directly, at least they be seen to encourage bias. So we want to be careful and sensitive to that. We want to their requirements. Quite often patient organizations would say, well, what we'd like to do is we'd like to sit down with the pharma and say we'll give them a report at the end of the year, which will show a metadata analysis of the patients. And that's really not good enough. Pharma needs access to detailed data, anonymized data, so that because the payers like EMA will want to be able to drill down on any data that's submitted to them. So we need to make sure that we can give them that data. A lot of times I'm also seeing that a lot of national registries is very much a national focus. So countries do their own thing for quite some time. They tend to do it in research organizations. And there's a phrase I coined, professorware, where a lot of the registries are technically very interesting, but there's limited experience in the real world of data collection. And they are sometimes left to the patient organization as an open source solution, and then they expect the patients to be able to support it themselves. It's not going to work. But then pharma comes along and they try to patch that up by maybe paying for salary for a data collection nurse or something like that. So it's a bit patchwork. What we also need is we need to recognize that EMA and other institutions like that need real-time data collection, so that if there's anything to do with things like adverse events, that data is collected immediately and it's not batch collected the way most registries operate on a slow batch process. Okay, so the other thing that we really have to deal with, and this is the real world of data, is a lot of the data is just missing or erroneous. Essentially, the people who are expected to collect that data do not get any compensation typically for it, and it's regarded as something that they have very little benefit for. So quite often we're dealing with a lot of erroneous, missing and duplicate data. What they see from the farmer's perspective is if they don't address registries early on in the product development cycle, it gets too late. And by the time they get good phase 3 results, the registries have all gone on their own way and they're not interoperable and they cannot share data and they don't have longitudinal data. Net effect of that is that the industry does not get their product authorized for reimbursement in anything but a very small cohort of patients. So the challenge here is that if they can give payers like NICE or EMA a lot of longitudinal data, they will be much more likely to get that product approved for reimbursement. So what we're looking at is the FedReg. This is our solution. It involves 3 different levels: defining a national registry, which will be based upon a model registry and then unique extensions for that country. And then a federated registry, where there is a minimum data set where data is shared. There's also annual assessments, and it will support external third-party registries. And then at the same time, we would also have an integrated real-world data study platform. So this is something that's designed to be used by pharma, and it's designed to provide them enough data so they can go back to the payers and regulators to provide an observational study. So what we're looking at here is that we have different types of data. We have our minimum data set that would be linked to the federated registry. We have a standard data. We then have unique extensions to handle the fact that perhaps the clinicians in Switzerland want to collect local data that's required for the Swiss authorities and that they can't use a standard product. And then more importantly, we have the private study. So that's where a pharma can have data that's specific for the treatment that they are developing, and that is private and linked to that pharma and available for them to report to to the health authorities. And we have static data and encounter or longitudinal data.
George, can I just interrupt you 1 second? George,
yes?
Sorry, it seems your connections is coming in and out a little bit. I'm wondering if maybe you turn off your camera, if it could just help with the fluidity
yes,
of the.
Okay, yeah, let's try that.
Just see if that works.
The camera's gone. You can still hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, fine. So we're looking at a model registry. So the idea of the model registry is this is where everybody starts from. And we're looking very briefly, we're comparing that to the US. So what we want to also have is a worldwide strategy here. We have our model registry, we have local extensions, so the registry is extended. So for example, in France and in Germany, there's different requirements, but also from the get-go, we want to make sure we have a patient portal. So we want to have integration here, because very often we found in the past that registries don't get used because basically the patients and clinicians see very little use for them, and therefore the number of patients in the registry is actually quite small. So if you make the registry useful, then a lot more people will use it. And the starting point there is get patients to use it, to enter PROM data, and also to be able to pull data from it. So when they go to different doctors, they have a complete data set that they can show. So this is the first phase, and what we want to try and do is we want to encourage farmers to help invest to get this off the ground if possible, but this is not an excessively expensive part of the process. The second phase is where we then move into a real-world data study platform. So this would be where the farmer would have obtained good phase 3 results, at which point they would need to be able to provide assurances to EMA and other regulators that they will provide longitudinal data to show safety and efficacy. So instead of developing this as an independent solution through a CRO, what they're able to do is they're able to extend the existing registries and add an extended data set to collect that data that they need. So this gives them an integrated solution that works with the national registry, and instead of these sides opposing each other, they're working in harmony. So let's then see what happens next. After we have the phase three results and we've funded the real world data study, we can also have, or even before that, we can have a federated registry. So the idea here is that the model registries would share a minimum data set to the federated registry. That would also allow us for things like deduplication and cleaning of data, and that would then provide a view for all patients throughout Europe or even internationally. The other advantage of the federated registry is that it allows us to use independent registries in well-established countries. So quite often we found that countries like the UK and France would have established registries, and they say, well, we don't want to use the new model registry. Or maybe countries like Denmark and Norway and Ireland and smaller countries don't have a well-funded registry with strong features, so they will adopt the model registry. So we have to have a pragmatic approach to working with everybody. And if we provide an agreed minimum data set, we can then have a federated registry that can collect data for everybody. So this is the overall solution that combines the 3 levels of a national registry that is extendable to meet national requirements, a federated registry that would allow longitudinal views of a patient progress over time, and a real-world data study platform that allows multiple pharmas to complete real-world studies within the context of the platform without having to develop a second platform. So what we need to think there just very quickly is the difference between a registry and a clinical trial is that registry data tends to be cheap, low quality, and from a large number of patients. Clinical trials, very small cohort of patients, very expensive. What we want to have is in this platform is that according to the funds that are available, studies can be set up that will be able to share data according to whether they want to have a clinical trial type study or more like a registry study. Okay, so what's the advantages for researchers? So patient organizations, instead of developing separate solutions, they receive a sustainable registry for a minimal cost. Very important, the patients own the registry. This is not a pharma registry. This is not an industry registry. The pharma will not influence the scientific direction of the registry. They will take a passive role. But the patients, as owners of the data, through their scientific committee, will decide what the registry is going to, how it's going to progress long term. The other thing is that registries can be extended to support national requirements. The federated registry supports existing sustainable registries. The patient portal will encourage patients and clinicians to use the software, and it's not just then a tool for research. A third-party hosting company will help the patient organization comply with GDPR. So the big concern there is the patient organization are the data controllers under GDPR, and they have to meet requirements to be compliant. Now, by using a hosting company and by having a data agreement with that, the hosting company can cover a lot of the requirements, such as what to do when there's a data breach or what to say to the data protection officer, because clearly that's outside the capacity of most patient organizations. The other very strong benefit of this approach is you have benchmarking. So here you have a process where you can compare the outcomes of patients in different countries. So this can be very useful for going to payers and health authorities and being able to show, well, yes, in the UK, patients don't do as well as patients in Germany. That's because they get more funding in Germany, and this is the outcome that we can see. So this type of data isn't theoretical. This is what we did with cystic fibrosis, and we're able to produce annual reports showing the outcome of how patients are doing in different countries. Very useful. What does the pharma get from this? So they get a platform that can develop over time. By outlining a data collection roadmap, they can help set up the model registry at an early stage. At this stage, we will be looking at early in phase 2 and early in phase 3 by being able to help create a roadmap and help support the definition of the model registry. Then you end up with a solution that is interoperable, and you don't get a lot of different countries going in different directions with silos of information. And then they only need to make, obviously from the farmer's point of view, they don't want to make excessive investments until they have positive phase 3 results. When they have that, then they can really afford to invest in this platform and to create a real world data platform and a European federated platform. They get access to an agreed upfront anonymized data set. So that's, everybody knows that they have access to this data, and it happens automatically, and there is no negotiation on in a year-by-year basis as to what data the farmer gets for what money it invests. By having a roadmap, a data collection roadmap, a farmer is able to tell patient community which data collection activities they will support. They can run multiple studies, as I indicated before, but also multiple farmers. This is not just a solution for a single farmer. Okay, as I said, we've used this before, and particularly in the European Cystic Fibrosis Registry and Vertex. Okay, so one of the other things we'd like to look at is, fine, that's all very well, George, but how do we get this thing started? So as I said earlier, I've worked in a variety of different software platforms over the years. All of those tend to be proprietary, and they had good advantages, but they did restrict a lot of the patient organizations. And over the last few years, I've seen open source solutions like REDCap really start to take off, and they do make a lot of sense for us. This is an open source solution. It's used by thousands of researchers throughout the world. You are not dependent on a developer's proprietary code. If the hosting company should let you down, you can transfer code to a third party. It is a rapid application development system, because what we've found is that patient organizations really can't put together a 60-page functional specification on what their software is going to do. So this is a very good way to show the community what the products can do, and to show, basically to give them a working prototype so that they can see how the registry is going to work. So it's a very effective tool, and I would encourage everybody there to consider quite seriously using REDCap for the initial model registry at least. It does have a lot of other interfaces so that when the clinical trial platform can be developed, then you can use the API functionality to expand that beyond that. So what we're looking at finally is the funding process. So what we're trying to look is, we have a developer who is providing the software, the European Federated Registry and the Patient Organization Registry. They are receiving funding principally from the founding pharma, but they would also maybe receive some public funding. The founding pharma, once they have got their product approved, will have to provide a 7-year commitment to the EMA to collect data on it. So they have to make a very large commitment. So this is of major benefit to the patient organization if they're using the same platform. The developer will independently provide hosting and support service to the patient organization. The pharma is not directly involved and does not influence the patient organization. The patients own the scientific direction and of the registry. The pharma receives the data they need to get the products approved in as many countries and for as many patient cohorts as possible. And other pharmas can access this, so it is not just a closed-off solution. So that's basically the end of my presentation. There are other areas that we can explore via time, but my time is up, as they say. Hello.
Thank you, George. Yes, well, I'm here. I'm wondering if thank you for that presentation describing, I guess, what is the ideal situation of a patient-driven network or collaboration between public, private, and then civil sector, if you will. We have a few questions regarding the platform, one of which is around its interaction with the reference network framework. And have you had the opportunity for that to be presented, or is there any information that you can provide around that?
Well, yes, I have 2 little slides on that if you want to just explore, because that's quite obviously a major issue. And I've worked with ERNs and I've worked with industry to explore some of the challenges. So maybe if I just quickly look at that. Sorry for this delay. Just 1 second.
I guess in the meantime, I can just remind everyone that I'm sorry I'm not addressing all of the questions that are put into the chat box for the moment, and certainly even more that are on Facebook. But as I mentioned in the introduction, we'll be consolidating all of the questions asked today, grouping them into types of questions, and with the help of panelists and, of course, other fact-finding, we'll come back with a complete document for everyone who's been on the call. We'll also be sharing the recording of this webinar as well as the slides from all of our speakers. And as George is finding his slides.
I can't take control there. So, yeah, sorry. I can't. Let me just see if I can do that now. No, so, I mean, I can explain some of the issues if you like. So there are challenges. I mean, the assumption here all the time is that ERNs and industry would work together, and the challenges that we have, there's several different challenges. I think we all know that the board of member states have specified that they don't want pharma to directly invest in ERNs to avoid any potential bias. So this is quite a big issue, and the ERN community have been trying to work on that to try to establish ways that pharma could invest, and they've now come up with the concept that pharma would be able to invest in a pool of perhaps non-specific ERNs or within a specific ERN, but that they could not specify how that those funds were invested. Now, that really, I presented that to many pharma. I've talked to practically all the orphan drug vendors, and they all say that's not workable. We must understand that ERNs are very broad. They're, as we've discussed earlier, they are covering hundreds of diseases. A pharma by its nature is interested in that one disease, that one tiny disease that they have an interest in. So they are very specific. So this is a challenge. They are really not interested in covering all diseases in an ERN. They are very interested in one specific disease. The other area that's a concern is that ERNs are not legal entities. And a pharma must invest in a legal entity. So they must, under regulatory requirements, they must have a legal agreement with the recipient of the funds, and they can't do that if they don't have a legal entity. The other problem is that under GDPR, there must be a patient organization who controls consent. And that consent has to be controlled by a single organization. Now, under the ERN process, every single hospital would separately control consent to that patient, accessing the patient record. This again would present a very difficult challenge for ERNs, where they might have to deal with 50 different hospitals. It's also an important point which I didn't describe, which is that consent isn't a static thing now. Under GDPR, it's dynamic. You need to have dynamic consent. So you need to be able, if you're, for example, if you are running a new study, you need to be able to consent the patients to join that study separately. So you really do need a patient portal, and you really do need to deal with an organization. So my solution that I've been promoting is that the pharma would help if it doesn't exist. They would establish a European-wide organization that would deal at a European level for that particular disease. Let's say, for example, it was Gaucher's. They would have a European Gaucher's organization. That European Gaucher's organization would, of course, work very closely with the associated ERN, and would then be able to give that, follow ERN standards, because ERN has created some great standards. They've created the CPMS data standard, they've created standards on pseudo-anonymization, they've created standards on consent, and it makes sense that any national registry should very closely align with those standards. So I think what I would be suggesting would be that we need an interim solution here, where there is a European-wide patient organization established if one doesn't exist, and that aligns itself with the ERN, and then forms that legal entity that the pharmas need, and also the single consent source. That answer your question?
Certainly mine, hopefully for the audience as well. And just to follow up with, I guess, the idea, thank you. So first of all, for clarifying a lot of the ethical, legal, and technical issues around registration of patients and the interface between industry and pharma. And I'm sorry that Luca is not online with us anymore, because he certainly would be very well placed to give us an update on where those discussions are now, but just to let everyone know that they certainly are happening, and everyone's very aware of the limitations, and unfortunately sometimes the solutions don't come as quickly as we would like them to, but they are being put in place. And in our famous question and answer document, we'll make sure to have Luca supplement some of the information that George just gave us with more details as to where that conversation is going. And then again, to add the fact that as things evolve in that debate, and as there are many other providers, if you will, who could solve similar, provide similar solutions to not only the technical requirements, but as you mentioned, the legal or policy requirements to be able to get around that bottleneck of interface between a private company and a network, whether clinical or research, that does not have a legal status. There will certainly be some other available presentations in our upcoming series to be able to address that. One question that's coming up for your platform, George, but I imagine the same goes for all of the other presentations, is around this idea of the rarest of diseases where there's little activity happening and when there's certainly no clinical trials in place. How do you see your platform being able to encourage activity there?
Well, I would come back to the REDCap as being really a very effective process to get a registry, even an ultra rare registry, established. So I do not think that patient organizations can, the idea of developing a detailed specification over 6 months and then getting a vendor to develop that, that's really not helpful because they've never done this before. So I think what we need to have here is a slightly a ready, fire, aim approach, and with a very flexible, rapid application development platform like REDCap, you can produce registries very, very quickly and very cost effectively. So I think that would be good because it also means that that it's possible to use that as a base for other countries, to share that design with other countries and to allow them to extend their data too. I think the overall concern that I would have for that recommendation that I would make to everybody is talk to the other countries. Try to engage very early on with what other countries are doing. And for some reason, they tend to be very national focused, and that every time I come into a new disease space, you find that there's a lot of existing registries and they really haven't cooperated at a European level. Now, one of the great things of the ERN is that it does create this sense of a European-wide solution to rare diseases. So I would suggest look at REDCap as a solution. We can obviously help anybody who wants to look at that, A, and B, look at a European-wide solution and really start to. The advantage of using the REDCap and so forth is that you talk about data sharing, which is something that you mentioned, Anna, early on. We really need to build up this sense of trust, be it within countries and also between industry and those countries. There has to be a sense of trust. As a senior executive said to me recently, is we're all doing the same thing here. We're all trying to develop a solution, a treatment for this disease, and we need to trust each other. What I have seen in other cases is that trust breaks down, that the gap between patient organizations and industry, there's a suspicion there, and so we want to avoid that if at all possible. But I'd certainly recommend using an open source solution like REDCap to get your registry started.
Okay, thank you for that, George. As I close with a few suggestions for next steps, I just wanted to remind everyone on the call that if you have not put your questions in the chat yet, this is certainly the time to do it. Oh, George, I have one more question for you. For those rare diseases who do not have a device or a drug, what would you put in place? I guess you just answered that question, so we can follow up in a Q&A document. In the meantime, if any other attendees have questions, this is certainly not your only opportunity. You can come in with questions via email as well, but we would very much appreciate that any questions you may have to Julian or George come in before we end the call. As those are coming in, I just want to remind everyone that we'll share everything that was presented today, including a completed question and answer. That the objective again of this webinar was to just get the conversation going, given that there's an ongoing need and interest to collect patient data, but that seems to only be increasing exponentially as we recognize the value of what data can bring in driving research, drug development, and an improved quality of life. So we do hope to continue this with a series of webinars where we will introduce other providers, either from an industry point of view, perhaps next time, maybe in terms of health economics, as Julian suggested, and then continued actors in both the service provision or public sector in terms of reference networks, and maybe the regulatory perspective as well. So lots to cover in the upcoming webinars. So I think with that, we can close the call. We have one more question from an international perspective. Why don't we end with that, asking about how to integrate, in this example here, an American organization. So perhaps, Julian, maybe you can let us know if that is an easily integrated element into Health 29?
Well, I see the question, but you know, selling our data to the Americans is a
Yeah, go
high
ahead.
achievement right now. Well, it depends of what kind of agreement has to be done between US and Europe. But right now, because we are following GDPR, the regulation for GDPR is much more strict than the regulation that the US citizens has to follow or the US organization has to follow. In other words, if a registry is able to be GDPR compliant, the registry will be much more restrictive in the US than any other solution right now. So my advice will be, if you want to make a registry that can be used between US and Europe, this registry has to be GDPR compliant, because if not, you won't be able to use it in Europe. And if this is happening, the registry will be able to be used in the US as well. And the US people will have to, you know, follow in the GDPR, the same GDPR regulations. And the role of data controller, data processor has to be defined as well. This role can be in Europe and the data can be under control. There is also some particular agreements between the European Commission and other countries in order how data can be shared across borders. And there is a particular framework for data agreement between US and Europe. But the solution has to be GDPR compliance for sure.
Yeah, Anna, could I just make a follow-up on
Please
that?
go ahead.
Yeah, we've come across this quite a lot, and essentially we've seen a lot of US companies are saying, oh, well, I've got European patients on my database and we're GDPR compliant. If your server is in the States, you're not GDPR compliant. You need to be GDPR compliant, you need to have a server within the European community that is legislated by the European community. So you really do need to have two separate servers to get an international viewpoint. As one of my earlier slides said, there has to be a US-based server that meets the US standards, and then a European server that meets European standards, and then you can have anonymized data that you can share data between both of those servers. But the idea is you do not want US data in Europe or European data in the US.
Thank you, George. Great. Well, I want to thank you both, as well as Lucas and Georgie for joining, and for all of my colleagues online for making this possible. It's been very valuable in terms of EURORDIS's role in being able to consolidate and help speak on behalf of rare disease patients in a unified way. Of course, I just want to remind everyone that there's, and there never will be, one solution, obviously, to collecting data for every stakeholder and every disease, but as much as possible, we try to encourage activities, platforms, policies, funding that makes collection as efficient as possible from a patient point of view, in terms of the efforts that they make in participating and in sharing that data for themselves and for future generations, but also in making sure that it's actually used. I think there's nothing less fair than taking the time to collect patient data and then not making the best use of it. So with that, I'll close our call and thank everyone for their questions, and just once again remind everyone that we will be consolidating these and completing them for your information and feeding back to all the participants on this webinar, but then inviting you to disseminate that information with your colleagues as well. And hopefully we'll add a few questions perhaps on feedback for topics that are of specific interest to you around registries and collecting patient data, and potential speakers that you would find useful that you've come across in your work. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Anna, for that opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you both. Take care.